good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world. One quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Friday, 2nd May, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China is navigating complex economic challenges, including ongoing trade friction, with the US. China has signaled a willingness to engage in trade discussions with the US, contingent upon Washington's removal of existing tariffs. The Ministry of Commerce has acknowledged recent contact from the US regarding potential de-escalation. However, some analysts view China's openness as a strategic maneuver to exert pressure on the US to lift tariffs. Slowing trade between the two nations is a direct consequence of these tariffs. Apple is experiencing declining sales in China, attributed to both local competition and US $900 million in tariff costs this quarter. Major retail suppliers anticipate possible price and sales fluctuations during discount events if tariffs on Chinese goods persist. To counter tariff effects, China is exploring K-pop as a resilient sector for boosting domestic spending. The Canton Fair has reduced fees by half for Chinese participants to provide support amid the trade conflict. In other economic news, Chinese electric vehicle startup XPeng achieved a record, delivering over 30,000 vehicles for the 6th consecutive month in April. Shaoxing, a subsidiary of Chinese steel giant Shougang, intends to invest in approximately 50 robotics companies over the next 2 to 3 years. Turning to the United States, the country remains embroiled in a trade impasse with China, characterized by tariff disputes and ongoing negotiations. A U.S. tax loophole that previously allowed tariff-free exports from China via e-commerce has been eliminated, potentially leading to increased online prices for American consumers. The U.S. has initiated the collection of import fees on small packages from China, primarily targeting e-commerce platforms such as Shein and Temu. The U.S. has reportedly contacted China to explore a reduction in the tariff war, though some analysts interpret this as China pressuring the U.S. to make concessions. NVIDIA has accused Anthropic of exaggerating claims in its defense of U.S. AI chip restrictions on China. Focusing on TikTok, owned by ByteDance, the platform is under intense scrutiny and facing significant penalties in both the European Union and the United States. European Union privacy regulators have imposed a €530 million fine on TikTok for user data violations. Separately, TikTok was fined $600 million for failing to adequately protect e-user data and for improperly transferring some of it to China. ByteDance intends to appeal this decision. United States. The U.S. is grappling with heightened geopolitical risks fueled by prior trade disputes with China and nations in the global south. Small businesses are urgently requesting tariff relief, citing detrimental effects on their operations. The expiration of tariff waivers for low-value Chinese imports is pushing Temu to transition its U.S. operations to a domestic fulfillment strategy. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang suggests that US export controls on NVIDIA's chips sold to China could strengthen Huawei's competitive advantage in the chip market. Apple projects a US $900 million tariff-related expense as it moves iPhone production from China to India. Despite emerging inconsistencies, a U.S.-led initiative aimed at resolving the war in Ukraine is seen by some as potentially advantageous to Russia. Senator J.D. Vance predicts that the Russia-Ukraine conflict will persist indefinitely, even if a minerals agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine is reached. China. China is contending with trade friction with the U.S., evidenced by Vice Premier He Lifeng's presence alongside President Xi Jinping during an inspection tour following the increase in US tariffs. Influenced by these tariffs, Apple's decision to move its iPhone supply chain from China to India is projected to cost the company US $900 million. Moreover, US export limitations on NVIDIA's chips could potentially benefit Hawaii by enhancing the competitiveness of its own chip. Russia's projected deficit for 2025 has tripled, primarily due to anticipated declines in energy revenue. The European Union continues to uphold its position of not recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. The Russian stock market, identified as MOEX, reflected the share prices of various sector enterprises as of May 2, 2025. US Senator J.D. Vance believes that the continuing war in Ukraine is unlikely to conclude in the near future, regardless of mediation attempts. India's stock market saw gains on May 2nd, driven by foreign investment, though it pulled back from earlier highs. Optimism around a possible US trade deal boosted the Sensex and Nifty, potentially leading to a third straight week of gains. Despite this, there are worries about the sustainability of India's export boom, fueled by manufacturers anticipating higher US tariffs, suggesting a possible future downturn. Indian bonds experienced their largest outflow since the J. Morgan Index inclusion. Carlyle Group sold its entire stake in PNB Housing. Apple plans a major investment increase in India, procuring over $19 bill as chips and increasing iPhone production. Defense stocks rose amid heightened tensions with Pakistan after the Pahalgam attack. The National Stock Exchange, NS, introduced the Nifty Waves Index at Waves 2025 to track India's creative economy performance. Saudi Arabia's financial sector saw significant activity with the Public Investment Fund, PF, pricing a $1.25 billion international sukuk offering. BNY Mellon received a license to establish a regional headquarters there. To further its economic diversification, Saudi Basic Industries Corporation, SABIC, inaugurated an expanded facility marking 25 years of operation. Saudi Arabia is actively investing in its tech sector. BC Firms SDV launched a $100 million fund for Saudi tech startups, and fintech firm Arid secured $16 in pre-series of funding. Flynas was recognized as the Middle East's fastest-growing airline, while Riyadh Air signed 11 deals to expand its global reach and promote Saudi culture. Looking ahead, Saudi Arabia will host EdgeX 2025, an event dedicated to advancing education, though the country's ambitious goals may be challenged by a slow recovery in oil prices. Japan is strategically weighing the use of its massive US Treasury holdings, exceeding $1 trillion, as leverage in forthcoming tariff negotiations with the Trump administration. Japan sees its status as a major creditor to the US as a potential advantage in these trade discussions. Concurrently, the Bank of Japan decided to hold steady its interest rates at 0.5% at its latest monetary policy meeting. The Nikkei stock average in Japan climbed, driven by positive sentiment related to the trade talks, registering its most extended rally since 2023. Preliminary forecasts indicate a contraction in Japan's Q1 GDP, attributed to soft domestic demand coupled with a rise in imports. In the corporate sphere, West Japan Railway revealed intentions to buy back and cancel shares in an effort to boost capital efficiency. Ukraine's wealth in mineral resources, deemed crucial for U.S. economic and defense sectors, was recently highlighted by the U.S. Geological Survey, though extraction is projected to be costly. Russia has asserted that the U.S. has broken Ukraine through a historic agreement. Moreover, Russia is allegedly establishing a security strip within Ukraine's Sumy region. Turning to the United Kingdom, a ban is planned that would prevent Bitcoin purchases using credit cards. Hexaware Technologies has marked its presence by opening a new UK headquarters in London. In the United States, optimism surrounding potential US-China trade discussions has buoyed stock prices. J.D. Vance has suggested that the conflict in Ukraine is unlikely to resolve in the near future. While Russia accuses the U.S. of crippling Ukraine with a historic deal, A Trump ally has cautioned Putin regarding sanctions. South Korea is currently focused on maintaining economic and political equilibrium. The acting finance minister assured the public that measures are in place to mitigate market volatility. The acting president, an economist, promised to uphold stability leading up to the election. To bolster the economy, South Korea approved a $9.70 billion package. Inflation in April rose by 2.1% year-over-year, a bit higher than anticipated. KuCoin, a cryptocurrency exchange, is preparing to relaunch in South Korea after getting necessary licenses. Australia's Prime Minister Albanese appears poised for electoral success, according to the latest polling data. Mirroring this optimism, Australian shares have surged, reaching a 2-month peak and marking their strongest week in over a year, fueled by receding trade concerns and a robust performance from banking institutions. The Australian Securities Exchange, ASX, will review its merger and acquisition regulations following criticism surrounding the James Hardie situation. Meanwhile, Infosys has finalized its odd $98 million acquisition of the missing link, an Australian technology services company, further expanding its presence in the region. Fueled by signals of lessened trade friction between the US and China, Asian markets generally rose. China's Commerce Ministry is reportedly weighing proposals from the US regarding tariffs previously levied by President Donald Trump. This news spurred positive movement in several key markets. Taiwan stock markets surged, showing a notable increase of 1.6%. Japan's Nikkei 225 index also saw gains, rising by over 0.6%. Mirroring this trend, Hong Kong's Hang Seng index similarly climbed by more than 0.6%. South Korea's Kospi, however, saw minimal change, remaining largely stable. Hong Kong is increasingly becoming a focal point for finance and aviation. HSBC is creating a captive insurer within Hong Kong to support its broader Asian expansion. Furthermore, Capital A, the parent company of Eurasia, intends to pursue a listing in Hong Kong, underscoring the region's growing importance as a financial center. Iran is grappling with renewed international scrutiny over its nuclear program. The Trump administration previously imposed strict sanctions to prevent the nation from developing nuclear weapons. These sanctions targeted countries buying Iranian oil, limiting their access to US markets. Adding to the nation's challenges, an explosion recently occurred at the port of Bandar Abbas. In response, Russian President Vladimir Putin offered assistance to Iran. South Africa's manufacturing activity faced headwinds in April, with factory sentiment weakening, possibly influenced by global trade uncertainties. The South African rand gained ground as markets awaited the release of the country's manufacturing PMI figures. In other developments, Adani Ports is aiming to expand its global footprint, with South Africa identified as a key target market. Taiwan is currently enjoying a period of economic prosperity, marked by a strengthening currency and booming stock market. The Taiwan dollar has reached its highest value in almost 4 decades, propelled by encouraging economic figures and optimism surrounding trade relations. The technology sector is particularly vibrant, with Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, TMC, experiencing a surge in its stock price. Morgan Stanley's designation of TSMC as a top pick, citing strong AI-related demand, has further boosted investor confidence. Pakistan's economic landscape presented a mixed picture, with inflation slowing in April. This occurred amidst significant stock market volatility. The Pakistan stock market plummeted nearly 8,000 points, starting April 22, due to heightened tensions with India. Investor confidence later rebounded as de-escalation calls grew. ExxonMobil's earnings have exceeded forecasts, driven by increased production in the Permian Basin and Ya, along with effective cost management, which offset the impact of lower oil prices. Moving to Vietnam, Chinese companies are grappling with potential tariffs from the United States, leading to order cancellations and a halt to expansion plans, despite a temporary reprieve. Turning to Europe, stock markets saw gains amid optimism about easing trade tensions. However, Tesla sales in key European markets declined, and Eurozone inflation remains stable. In the United States, foreign investors are increasingly concerned about the investment climate, while McDonald's experienced a 1% global sales decline with a 3.6% drop in the United States, indicating decreased consumer spending and Elon Musk's standing as facing challenges. Meanwhile, Germany is seeing its bonds and the euro benefit from President Trump's tariffs, and German pension funds are looking towards Asia due to concerns about US assets. Ireland's privacy regulator has levied a €530 million fine against TikTok for GDPR violations, citing the transfer of European user data to China. Mongolia is aiming to attract 2 million tourists annually by 2030, potentially contributing 10% to the country's GDP. In Canada, Mark Carney is scheduled to meet with President Trump next week, while the S&P TSX Composite Index experienced a slight decline of 0.9%. Capital A in Malaysia is exploring a listing on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange after emerging from a financially distressed status. Azerbaijan's deputy prime minister has announced plans for a partnership with Saudi Arabia to export green energy to Europe. Thailand's finance ministry projects 36.5 million foreign tourists this year. In Singapore, Exwit Asia will host its 2025 user conference on May 29th. Italy's major banks are approaching earnings season amid potential deal activity. Australia should take note of the energy challenges faced by Spain. Former Prime Minister Han visited the National Cemetery in South Korea. France is targeting Temu and Shein with new e-commerce regulations. Strong momentum in Africa is driving growth for Distel. Finally, Kenya is planning to reduce its next budget. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.